This episode is brought to you by State Farm. From your morning podcast to your afternoon playlist, State Farm knows you personalize your entire day, and that's why State Farm helps you personalize your insurance with the State Farm Personal Price Plan. It offers coverage options that help protect what you care about most at an affordable price just for you. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Prices vary by state. Options selected by customer. Availability and eligibility may vary.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. It's tax season, and we're all a bit tired of numbers. But here's one you need to hear. $16.5 billion. That's how much the IRS flagged for possible identity fraud last year. Now here's a good number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it. Guaranteed. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
I've finally accepted that radical acceptance around, for the longest time, I was going to write Bill a letter and regroup and say, are you sure? I want to know the truth, because it's come out that maybe I don't know the full truth around my conception. And I've just really recently come to realize I'm good with it. I'm okay. I belong to myself now, right? I belong to me. We all deserve to have whatever what we want, but that's not my reality. And I honor that. I have 3 fathers, and I am incredibly grateful to each of them. He gave me life.
Welcome to DNA Surprises, a podcast that delves into the world of unexpected DNA discoveries. I'm your host, Alexis Auersalt. In July 2021, my life took a surprising turn when I found out that I'm an NPE, a person who has experienced a non-paternal event. In other words, my biological father isn't who I thought he was. Join me as we explore the stories of NPEs, adoptees, and donor-conceived people and their families. Get ready to unravel the astonishing journeys that begin with a simple DNA test. This is DNA Surprises. Black sheep, golden child. In the DNA Surprise community, these are labels we hear a lot. In this week's episode, Sarah shares her emotional journey before, during, and after her DNA discovery. Growing up, she never felt like she fit in, but her concerns were often dismissed. Many years later, her suspicions were confirmed. Her dad, Joe, was not her biological father, but she didn't know for sure who was. Sarah's story also touches on the role that alcohol played within her family and in her own personal journey. She discusses why she ultimately decided to seek sobriety and create strong boundaries with her raised family. She's also exploring relationships with her newfound relatives and making sense of a newly discovered Italian identity. Thank you for sharing your story, Sarah.
My name is Sarah. I'm 57 years old, and I live in Boulder, Colorado. I'd like to start with, Alexis, a reading which really summarizes kind of where my heart is around this. It's from the Book of Awakening by Mark Nepo, and the date is February 21st, Cleaning Out the Wound. So often I have felt troubled and guilty bearing witness to my pain, and yet not to makes things worse. Somehow, saying just what mother had done in her cool need to be in the center, or just what father couldn't do out of his fear of facing my mother, somehow telling the truth as I know it makes me feel like a bad person, as if I'm making my pain up, as if I'm hurting others by saying bad things about them. But the unshakable bottom of all of this is that I'm not making things up. If I have unkind things to say, it's because I've experienced unkind things. And so my only guide in this witnessing is to be accurate and honest. While I am not a victim, I didn't ask for certain shaping experiences to happen to me. I didn't ask to be slapped or ridiculed as a boy, or to be mistreated by lifelong friends later in life. In truth, if I had experienced different things, I would have different things to say. What is most healing about bearing witness to things exactly as they are, including my own part in my pain, is that when the voice of the pain fits the pain, there is no room for distortion or illusion. In this way, truth becomes a clean bandage that heals, keeping dirt out of the wound. To voice things as they are is the nearest medicine.
I love that so much. Really resonates. I'm sure it will resonate for a lot of people listening.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. And I really hope to come to this, sharing all of this with rigorous honesty. And yeah, it just feels good to share my truth, my story. So my parents were born and raised in Kokomo, Indiana, where they met and dated in high school. My grandparents were friends. It was very much an approved pairing. Then they went to Purdue, where they both excelled as students and socially. They were both presidents of their fraternity and sorority. My dad was the first computer science graduating class from Purdue and was accepted to Harvard Business School. They got engaged just after graduating and moved to Boston, where I was born soon after. Upon graduating Harvard, my dad got a job with a bank in Cleveland, where they moved, and my sister was born in July, just after they moved to Cleveland. My parents separated when I was 2.5. They were divorced by the time I was 5, and within 6 months of each other, both remarried when I was 7. Shortly after, my dad and stepmom moved to Boulder. I don't remember really being able to grieve my father's absence or the divorce, but I was so young, and I loved my stepfather. I adored him. But still, my dad moving so far away, it didn't feel right to me, and I blamed myself.
Did you get to go visit him very often?
We did. Jen, my sister, and I, Jenny, she was Jenny growing up, would visit him typically twice a year, once in the winter, like our spring break. We would go skiing. We would go tubing and rafting. We'd travel all over Colorado. It was really fun. It was really nice. But it was definitely separate. One of my deepest struggles was that I didn't seem to match. It was both inside and outside. I didn't feel it. My mom and sister share striking Aryan features: blonde hair, pale skin, and light blue eyes. My dad had darker Scottish Irish coloring, which I kind of look like, but I didn't resemble him. And when I'd ask why I didn't look like them, I was met with pretty dismissive responses like, don't be silly, stop being dramatic. And I was dismissed. And I think it's at that time I just kind of started to disassociate and shrink, because I couldn't reconcile the face I saw in the mirror with the person I was told I was supposed to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Did you suspect that you were adopted, or that one or both of your parents was not your biological parent at that time?
Yeah, I used to. So Jenny and I were 16 months apart. So we were very close. We were young. She doesn't remember the divorce, and she barely remembers meeting my stepfather. And my mom would date after the divorce, and I would approve or not approve of the men that would come to the door. Mm-hmm. And I would do crazy things, like I would knock over an entire plant so that he couldn't come in. And my stepfather was the first one that I asked him to play leapfrog. And I was like, for sure he's out, right? And I wanted him to be out because I wanted dad. I didn't want these men. And he agreed. And I was like, sweet, this game on, right? We were lucky. We had a really ideal life. We'd spend the summers at the pool, at the country club, and I would tan and my sister would burn like a lobster. I think too, since my sister and I were so close in age, and we were kind of like salt and pepper, right? We were good complements to each other, but we were very different. Where it really tough is that my mom were always like baking soda and vinegar, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I kind of very early on felt like, I now, from the lens I know now, from the therapy I've done, I was the black sheep and the scapegoat, and Jenny was the golden child. Yeah, it was a very idyllic neighborhood. It was a lot about looking good, right? Everything was about appearances from the outside and what country club you belong to. And I just never really felt like I fit in. I felt like an outsider. When it really hit me was when my half sister was born. So my dad and my stepmother, she's 11 years younger, and she looks a lot like my sister. And I was very quiet and introverted, and my sister was really, really outgoing and popular. And that really worked for my mom, and my quiet nature did not. Jenny was always just a natural athlete, where I always was kind of like, I remember once, like in a neighborhood kickball game, like the next door neighbor's dad saying, that girl, Sarah just has 2 left feet, right? Which is why swimming was really my thing, synchronized swimming especially, which my sister and I, but that was really felt like that was something that I could do with my 2 left feet, 2 left flippers. It didn't matter so much.
Yeah.
But what I really noticed is that Nora, my half sister, was really athletically inclined as well.
Okay.
And so it was like, wait a minute, like, why did it totally miss me?
Mm-hmm.
And then also, I was very much, art was my refuge. That was my everything. So my dad, he's at a Harvard business grad, computer science grad, and then he was an entrepreneur. He and my stepmother worked at IBM for years coding. And then my dad started a business. He loved to gamble, and we played games with him a lot when we went out to visit. I remember my dad teaching Jenny, he was trying to teach us how to count cards. He's like, you can do really well at games if you can count cards. I was like, why does a deck of cards only have 4 different suites? Like, and why are there only 2 colors? Like, can we have more colors? And like, my dad had all these different playing decks of cards, and most of them were your typical poker cards with the like, they don't have the decoration on them. And then sometimes he'd have some, my stepmother would pull out. She'd like, Sarah, you don't like these. And I would like totally not playing the game, looking at the cards. And then there's my sister who's like, a total wizard, like my dad. And back then it was math and science. Like that's where you were smart. Art wasn't really something that you were smart at. And it wasn't also something that it was on either side of the family. Like I was like kind of came out of nowhere with this artistic ability. So my sister Jen was just a year behind me. And I remember we went to junior high. I was in 8th grade. She was in 7th. And I was super excited because she was always the most popular and everybody loved her. And so I was super proud. And I remember she started joking with everyone that I was adopted. And they were like, she's like, oh, that's not my sister.
How did you feel when she did that?
I was really, really hurt. And she was like, oh, just can't you take a joke? And I don't think we ever told my mom and stepfather, because when I mentioned it to my mom more recently, she said she had no idea. There were other instances when, like, I was at the hardware store with my mom. I think I was around like 8 or 9, and I was in the summer, so I was really tan. And this friend of my mom's, I had never met her, came up, and she was right behind us in the checkout line. She said, oh my God, Anne, I didn't know you had an exchange student this summer.
Mm.
And my mom got really flustered and then picked up, like, very kind of then cheery and, oh no, this is Sarah, my daughter. I'm surprised you haven't met her. And then I remember getting in the car and she was so angry. And it just hurt like hell,
Yeah.
When I was really young, I did the math, and my sister and I would giggle about it because my parents got married in October of 66 and I was born in March of 67. And I remember I was around 15 and I don't know, somehow I got it. At this point, Jenny is like, she's in the AP math program. She's like accelerated. Meanwhile, I have a math tutor, I'm like the stupid story problems, like this ship leaves, goes this way. Like,
Yeah.
I don't care about the ships. I'm like, what color? You know what I mean? Like, I would be like, what color is the ship? Can we talk about the ship? I remember going to Jenny and saying, like the numbers just don't work. Like, I don't make sense. And she was like, no kidding, dumbass. Like, they've never worked. And I got really upset. And I was like, oh my God, nobody's told me. And I went to my mom and confronted her, and she was upset. So she shipped me off to Colorado to be with my dad so that he could explain it to me. I'm like, it seems pretty straightforward. We went skiing together, and it was really neat. It was the only time until just before when he was in hospice, when I got to spend time with him, that it was time alone with him. And I look back on that now, and I'm pretty sure he wanted to tell me.
What was the story that you got?
That the first time they had ever had sex was when they got pregnant. It was on top of the Sigma Chi house. And I grew up knowing that they were high school, but right, like they were kind of like this perfect couple. My mom always talked about how he was such a catch, and my grandmother, his mom, and my aunt, they were so loving, really, really loving. I was like, okay, this is fine. This is what happens. I mean, I didn't really care. I just wanted to know what the truth was.
Right.
I was like, why are we keeping this a secret? It doesn't seem like that big of a deal to me, but it was a really big deal to my mom. The other thing that's happening around this time is that there's definitely alcoholism involved, and I'll speak more to that a little bit later. But I think that there was just a lot of anger and rage from my mom, and the more that she would drink, the more kind of belligerent she would come. I was her focal point. You know, my sister was smart. She saw how it wasn't working for me and did the exact opposite.
Yeah. Trying to kind of like that survival instinct from your sister.
Totally. Yeah. I had really good grades. I was really popular, but it was never enough. Like I would come home with almost perfect grades, and she would say, well, what did Seth get? Who was like valedictorian of our class. And we went to elementary school together. I think I did a lot of disassociation. When I look back, there's a lot that I just don't, it's just kind of glossy. And this sense of longing. It was just a longing that I couldn't speak to. I went to WashU in St. Louis, Washington University in St. Louis for college. And I wanted to study fine art, but I didn't have a portfolio. So I applied to the architecture program. Right after elementary school, art was kind of dismissed for me. I took a couple classes in high school, but it was really like not promoted at all. So anyway, I ended up in the architecture school, and I was rushing a sorority. And so I was trying to juggle that beginning social life with academics. And when I didn't show up to my first studio critique with drawings, I was shocked that my professor didn't cut me some slack, right? Like I was like,
yeah, that adjustment.
And I was like, don't you know I'm an important person rushing a sorority? And, and that was the first time that I realized that partying and performing might not always mix. I also pledged Pi Phi not Kappa, as my mom was, and she was furious. And this is something that she continued to bring up constantly. I know it's like embarrassing to acknowledge. It's kind of comical, but it was a really big deal to her. I think she felt really betrayed. And I remember telling her, because she said, why didn't you? And I said, because I wanted to do something that was mine. So I graduated with a degree in psychology and minors in business and art history, just to never cover my bases with everyone. After college, I moved to Chicago, met my husband, and unwittingly continued the familiar pattern of attachment I had learned from my mother. We dated on and off for 7 years. And then my parents left. They were in Baltimore at this point because my stepfather worked for the Cleveland Browns, which is a huge part of our growing up, and the drinking and the presenting and entertaining. They were part of the moving the Browns to Baltimore to become the Ravens. And my parents left Baltimore. They were kind of squeezed out, unfortunately, and they moved to California to be close to Jen and Bailey. So now my sister had her oldest. So the kid's dad and I got engaged, and we moved to Denver. And at our wedding, we had bagpipes because we were both Irish, right? Our honeymoon, we went to Ireland. We were excited to meet our homeland. We had 2 kids very quickly. They look exactly like their mom and dad, but they did not match my sister's kids at all, their cousins. And they would ask about it. And I was like, oh, anyway. So after 8 intense and complicated years of marriage, we got divorced. In the years following my divorce, my drinking definitely escalated. It was just another way to numb. And it was all cloaked in the mommy wine culture. But I was really good at working really hard. I was a hustling realtor. I was totally on my own financially, no financial support, and I was determined to make things work. When I was 47, I was diagnosed ADHD, so that helped to make some things clear. But anyway, so there's a lot going on here, right? My parents moved from San Diego to Denver to help me, but it was really because they were broke. John, my son, was already a freshman in college and Annie a senior in high school. And my friends were all like, oh my God, Sarah, how are you going to do this? Like you and your mom are supposed to live separate. Like you've lived separately. That's what works. And I was like, I have no idea how this is going to work.
And is your dad still in Boulder at this time?
No, dad passed. He died at 68 of bone metastases of prostate cancer. And that added to my drinking for sure, because we didn't really grieve him. It was a lot. He was really vilified. My mom really vilified, and my sister, I think. And I did for a while. There was a while there when I was like, yeah, dad's not that cool. But, I was living in Denver. He was in Boulder. I got to spend more time with him. And then I really got to spend a lot of time with him when he was sick.
Just take your time.
Yeah.
Take your time.
He's a really cool person. Yeah. And my kids loved him, adored him. And they love my mom and stepfather as well. But Grandpa Joe was so much fun. And we didn't have a really strong relationship, right? But he was just, anyone that knew him absolutely loved him. He had such a big heart. He was wicked smart. He had a great sense of humor. He was just kind of the life of the party. Mm-hmm. So my parents move out here and I'm like, okay, I'll try to bond with mom. And really it was just, she really wanted a drinking buddy. And I tried for a little bit, but I was like, it didn't really work. Because at the same time, I began a committed long distance relationship with someone who was a friend back in Chicago days. He made me see how dysfunctional things had become, because he comes from a family, they're normies, muggles.
Yeah.
And he also did not like at all how she treated me. And he could see how hard it was for me that I wasn't aligned with my true nature as he had known me back in Chicago. So at this point, I'm in real estate. And he's like, you've always wanted to live in Boulder, because I did. I always wanted to live in Boulder, but the kid's dad always wanted to be in Denver, which was fine. So I got a job in Boulder and I moved. I told everyone that it was to get away from the kid's stepfather, because at that point, the co-parenting was like, the bulk of it was done. And it was really hard. I did my thing and I need some space. But it was really to create some distance from my mom too. And when I told her about the job, she was furious. She was mad. And then I started talking about moving to California, where this relationship was. And she was so angry. And she's like, we moved here to help you. And it was like, well,
you didn't ask for that.
I didn't ask for it. And I was like, the help could have come when the kids were younger, like there's this whole span of time, because they would talk about it. They're like, we're going to buy another home and we're going to come out there. And then they never did. But so then this job was really, really demanding and tough. And I was totally out of alignment and I was drinking more. And anyway, I went back to Chicago one day for a work barbecue. And I realized like I'm off path and I'm not living my full life. And the next morning I woke up and I had just finished reading We Are the Luckiest by Laura McKellen, which is a wonderful book on sobriety, her story. And I just knew, before my feet hit the floor, I just knew I'm done. This is done. But I also was like, oh crap. I think for the longest time, I'm totally owning my side of the street, but part of the reason why I didn't quit is that I go through phases where I wasn't drinking and then I would be with my mom and I'm like, I need to have a drink, or right. Like it was just alcohol is everywhere. So I would be like, oh, I'll have a drink. But anyway, fortunately, that's still my day one, July 11th. So in sobriety, everything really slowed down. I started to see my life more clearly, and that clarity extended to my relationship with my mother, who continued to drink heavily. My family kind of feigned that they were happy for my choice to stop drinking, but when they drank, it came out that I made them uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. Especially my mom, who said, I liked you so much better when you drank with me. After a particularly painful Thanksgiving, in 22, her behavior really crossed the line with both me and my daughter. I knew I needed space from her, and I had no idea how to set that boundary. At this point, I was working with a really wonderful therapist 2 weeks later from that Thanksgiving, I went to San Diego for my sister's retirement party, and she was having a classroom dedicated to her. I got the invitation, and at first I didn't reply. And then I was like, yeah, I'm going to go. And both my mom and my sister were like, you don't have to come. You don't have to come. And I was like, well, I totally want to come and support you. And my sister and I weren't close, but it would definitely be something that like, it wasn't expected of me, that I was like, of course I'll come. And while I was there, I learned that I had been intentionally not invited to an early Christmas celebration. So the day I left that night, they did this, we do fondue every Christmas Eve, but since they were already all there, and that was,
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was devastated.
Yeah.
It was really hard. And so I returned back with the help of my therapist. I decided I was going to talk with my mom, and I was so petrified. I was so petrified that I scheduled an appointment for therapy right after that. I knew when I was going to talk with her. I actually called in my car from the therapist parking lot. And I was really kind and loving. And I just requested that we step off the dance floor. She did not like that analogy. She was like, I don't understand what you're talking about. Why are we talking about a dance floor? And I was like, okay, I want no future damage. And I went over Thanksgiving, and she said, I don't remember anything about Thanksgiving. So what happens is 2 to 3 glasses of wine, she blacks out. And if she doesn't remember it, it didn't happen. And that's where most of her damage happens. But then the next day I texted my stepfather to see if he wanted to talk about the conversation. And his text back to me really, it just cut me to my core. And he said, when you choose to hurt your mother, you choose to hurt me. I was crushed, as my stepfather was my rock. He was my person. I went to him. I mean, he was my dad, right?
Yeah,
he raised me.
He
walked me down the aisle.
Yeah.
He's there. That's when I was like, holy cow. I left the cult of drinking, but I've also been othered now. He also told me that he could no longer help me with my stuff.
I'm so sorry.
And to feel that sense of like, because for him, my mom was always conditional, but even though we weren't his kids, we were his kids, and his love was unconditional, right? He was my guy. I felt really alone, but I also know that I think it propelled me. So this is where the juice comes. In January of 23, I sent in an ancestry test. And in February, I received it back, and my deepest fears and suspicions were confirmed. I wasn't my father's biological child, and I wasn't Irish on my paternal side, as my surname would suggest. I was 50% Italian.
Wow. What did you feel when you saw those results? Because at this point, you have been ostracized from your family. You always kind of had this feeling. Were you validated? Were you destroyed? Were you both?
Both. Both. There's nothing really to explain it.
Yeah.
It's the weirdest thing, right? You're affirmed and you're like, yes, I'm not crazy. And then it's like, but so who am I? And who's my dad? I would cry myself to sleep. Like, it's so interesting. I sent the test away and I would cry myself to sleep thinking like, I really want Joe to be my dad. I really want my dad. And my dear friend, Lauren, I remember I told her one morning, and she said, honey, and she has this really nice, like kind of Southern accent. She said, honey, we need to prepare. We need to prepare. But he isn't. It's the only time in my 3+ years of not drinking that I've wanted to drink. It went straight to my soul.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember, like, I remember exactly where I was sitting, what I was doing. It came on a Friday night, which was weird. It came 2 weeks early, so I wasn't expecting it. And it was like, these are all the surnames in your family. Every single one of them was Italian. There was this mix of like excitement, like, oh my God, that's so cool, I'm Italian. Makes sense. I make sense now. I make sense.
Yeah.
And then the grief. And then all the questions, who knew what, right? I knew the information was accurate because on my maternal side, my first cousin, Sally, was there. And she was 60%, which is exactly what a first cousin should be. And then, interestingly, it tells me that everyone on my paternal side is Italian. I know there are no matches, but I still put in my dad's last name and try and build out the tree. I mean, hours and hours and hours looking, searching. I'll type this, if I type in it, maybe, dead end. So at the same time, there's all these paternal matches, and I just start reaching out. And a third cousin, Connie, God love her, she replied back right away. And she said, oh my gosh, you match my Carano. She's like, what's up, honey? And I was like, it's kind of a mess. I was like, I don't know. I was like, I think I might be looking for my biological father, but I don't know. She's like, well, you match the Carano line. You match this line. And we share the same DNA there's a Facebook research group. So I'm going to invite you. It's called the Facebook research group. And she invited me, introduces me, and immediately, like a couple of the admins, a couple of their people are like, what is Sarah Kelly doing here? Right?
Take your plans out of the group chat and get long weekend ready in new Abercrombie. From day to night, pack new outfits for every part of your itinerary. Grabbing brunch? Throw on the A&F Mila dress. Then head to your dinner reservation in their new bubble hem mini dress. And yes, permission to overpack for pics with the girls. Abercrombie's best-selling Scarlet Squirt deserves a post in your feed. Your plans are worth it. Shop Abercrombie's new long weekend collection online or in store.
And I was like, yeah, that's the $1 question. Yeah. But they were all so warm and welcoming. And they're like, hi, oh, you match this person and you match that person. And I'm like, what is going on? So are two small, they're adjacent communes in southern central Italy. And everyone's DNA in this group is somehow mapped back to ancestors from those communes.
So they were wondering why the heck an Irish person was added to the group. Yeah.
Yeah. And so Connie suggests give them your details, keep it just very factual. There are hobby genealogists here. This is what they love to do it, and they help a lot of people. And so I shared the pertinent information. I had also 6 months or maybe a year prior been given the name I had shared with my aunt. I was like, I just don't know that my dad is my dad, and who did mom date at Purdue, do you remember? And she shared a name, and it was a total dead end for me. The way she gave it to me was spelled incorrectly because I looked in the Purdue yearbooks and nothing came up. So sure enough, the next morning I wake up and I have two separate from two different women trees built out. They match exactly. One was digital and one was handwritten. And Connie then found a senior yearbook photo of my dad and sent it to me and said, I think this is your dad. And it was like looking in the mirror. I was so excited. And then I was so heartbroken, like so weird to look at yourself in somebody that you don't know.
Yeah.
So that was a Friday. Saturday, I'm on the way to meet one of my best friends to go for a walk because I'm melting, right? I'm just melting down. God, thank God she was there for me. I called my sister on the way and I was really anxious. And her first response is, this doesn't make any sense. I don't understand what you're talking about. And she said, well, Ancestry is a hoax. And that's what I had been told. And that's what my mom would say. And then it came to find out that that's what my mom was saying because she was actually petrified of me to take the test. And so my sister was in on it. And then one of the first things she said, did you ask for mom's permission? And I was like, no, I did not. So at this time, I'm not talking to my mom, right? She said, if you're doing this to get back at mom, I want no part of it. And then she came up with, what's your end game here, Sarah? I don't know that there are any words.
That's just so
I mean, this is my
hard.
sister.
Yeah. To be met with like no empathy. I know a lot of people can't understand the situation because it's really hard to conceptualize, but to not offer, I'm sorry, this is shocking or anything. I'm just really sorry that that was the reaction.
Right. So she said, what are you asking of me? And I said, well, would you take an ancestry test? And so she said, I'd think about it. And then that night she texted me, this has been something you have been grappling with your whole life. We even used to giggle about it as little girls, but I just don't understand what your end game is. What's your end game? And I honestly don't remember. I think I responded the next day after like several conversations with friends and therapists, because I was like, what? My end game? I don't have no end game here. Truth. Yeah. Just want to know the truth. I just found out not only that dad's not dad, but that I'm 50% Italian. The following day, I let my aunt know. I got my ancestor results back, and this is what I found. And I know who my dad is. And she said, you did not get that name for me. I've already lost one sister. I can't lose another one. Your mom can never know that I gave you that name. And I said, you giving me that name is not how I came to this. It's my DNA, which is in the system, and there's a Facebook group. She's like, there's no Facebook. I was like, yeah, no, actually there is. They're very proud people.
Yeah.
And they've tracked it. They really want to track it. I'm so thankful for my therapist and my dear friends who were there for me, because they just really kept me going. So I went back and forth in the next few days on how to proceed and how do I reach out. And at first I was trying to talk my therapist into going to my mom. And she's like, so you could do that. And why would you go to the person who has not told you your whole life? Right. And I was like, oh yeah, good point.
Yeah.
And so I decided to write him a letter. I found 3 addresses for him and I FedExed him a letter. I learned that he's retired, but a very accomplished pharmacologist. You can see he has had enough successes that he's memorialized online, right? And I also found an obit for my grandfather, his dad, which really, really helped with a lot of information because I have no DNA to go off of. So this family has virtually no DNA in Ancestry or 23andMe. So it's all just based on working backwards, right? So, and they're not on social media at all. So it was just a lot of Google. So I sent these 3, I FedExed, I wrote the same letter, and I basically just said, this is what I know. I think we're closely related. I would really like the opportunity to get to know you, but if not, I understand, but please let me know. In the meantime, Jen is sending me emails and texts shaming me around what I'm doing. I really think we need to tell mom. And I'm like, we? Like what? She was sending me emails about how false Ancestry was and that the ethnicity was off. And I was like, I get that there might be a 2 to 5% variance, even though we know it's like more like 1% maybe. But like I'm 50% Italian, so it doesn't track. And the only Irish that's showing up is on my maternal side, ironically, right? So I asked her to take a DNA direct test, which is you order it on Amazon. It's what the old maternity test was. Twice I ask her and she declines. And I'm like, son of a bitch. This is not working.
Why is she saying no? Is it just because she doesn't want to be involved with your mom, like the quote unquote fighting?
She's not giving a reason. Well, one email did say, you are exploding the entire family.
Okay.
You're exploding the family. I went to my half sister and I told her the truth. I was like, Jen and I are blah, blah, blah. This is what's happened. Would you be willing to take a direct DNA test? And she's like, well, I don't think I need to do that because dad got us, she and her husband, ancestry test 10 years ago. And as soon as she said that, I remember exactly where I was sitting, what I was doing. And this is what's so crazy. I've already seen a picture of myself in my dad. I have a family tree of my dad. And yet I'm like devastated and heartbroken that because it's just like, I don't know, somehow in my mind, in my fairy tale little Sarah mind, I was like, Joe Kelly's going to be my dad, but then Bill, I don't know. It was the weirdest. I know you get it, but it's the craziest feeling. But she did affirm for me.
Yeah. It's those mental gymnastics that we all do. Like somehow you're trying to make things make sense that don't make sense.
Totally. That was the beginning of March 9th, which is my birthday. I'm driving to Ann Arbor to see my son for a mom's weekend. And Annie, my daughter, calls. She's studying abroad in Florence, coincidentally, right? Not so coincidentally. And she calls to wish me a happy birthday. And I wasn't planning on telling her, but I just couldn't. I was like, you're Italian, I'm Italian.
Yeah.
Yay. And she's like, oh my God, this is so cool. And then that night I told my son, and they both had this they're just such cool kids. I mean, they're young adults, but their first response was like, oh my God, that's so cool. This makes so much sense in all the ways. And then Annie's like, how cool, here I am. You definitely have to come visit me, which I ended up doing. And then they went to WTF, like, what? How did you never know this? And so then I called the kid's dad, he was at the time, they're in Italy visiting Annie. I said, I need to share all this, stuff with you. And I was a little bit worried that he would be pissed off about the health perspective of it, and which I would be as the other parent. And he wasn't. He was really cool. And he reminded me a story. This is weird, of when we had first started dating. And I still don't remember any of this. He had met everyone. We were with my mom and my sister in Cleveland. They were still in Cleveland. And he said to me, I don't think Joe Kelly's your dad. I said, yeah, I know. Right. Like totally like, oh my God, finally somebody. He told me that we went and looked at Purdue yearbooks and nothing came up. Then I went to my mom and sister and told them and said, oh my God, Matt thinks that, and apparently they totally shamed me, threw him under the bus. I don't remember any of it. It's the craziest thing. Meanwhile, so there I am in Ann Arbor. I'm staying with a close friend. I realized from my art website that I can see if somebody clicks the URL. So all of a sudden I look and I can see that this one address is clicked on. And I had been confirmed by FedEx the day before that the letter had arrived that day. I spent the next 2 weeks digging like crazy to learn more about my dad, Bill, and the family. The obituary, as I mentioned, helped a ton. I learned that I had 3 half-brothers, only one of which is living. He mailed the letter back.
How long did it take for him to do that?
I sent it on February 28th. I got a notification from where I sent the FedEx that they had received the letter. The 16th, I got the letter back. Bill had highlighted where I had said, if you don't want to connect, I'll respect that. Just please let me know. He just highlighted, don't want to connect. I had sent him 2 pictures, one of me where you could see like in the middle of summer as tan, no makeup, but you can definitely see the Italian in me. And then another picture of me and my sister when we were 8 or 9, where it's very clear we're like salt and pepper. And then an art flyer. He sent both the pictures back, not the flyer. I'm assuming that was thrown away, but yeah, that really sucked.
Yeah, take me through that. Were you hoping that he would embrace you, want you to meet his family, give you some explanation, all of those things? All of those things.
I didn't know anything about him at this point. Yeah, I wanted that fairy tale. You're the daughter. I have these 3, you're the daughter I've always dreamed of. Welcome to my world. We're so happy that you found us.
What did you do after that?
I called my therapist.
Yeah.
She was like on a speed dial,
sure.
right? I then the next day I asked my parents, my mom and my stepfather, to meet. First, I asked my therapist, would you be willing to mediate a meeting? And she said, of course. Yeah. And then they said yes. We set the date. It was a Tuesday. And that Monday, I practiced. I had a script I wrote out because I knew I would be able to say it. And it was really good because I was like, I want to learn. And my therapist, Taylor, was like, Sarah, like, what do you really want from this? This is about you. Because I kept saying, well, if I say this, then that, and it was to make it easier for my mom and Jim. And she's like, this is your request. This is your meeting. This is about you. You get to call the shots. And I was like, oh, okay. We met, they came in, and I said, I know that Joe is not my biological father and that Bill is, and I want to know the truth around my conception. And my mom immediately just like fell into herself. I started crying. And then right away, my stepfather said, it's just as much my fault as your mom's fault that you don't know. And I was like, well, this is the curveball I wasn't anticipating.
He knew.
And now looking back, it's totally, because he's such an enabler. I mean, God love him, but he is. It's like, what are you, and he said, well, the divorce was so bad, we didn't think you can handle it. And the very first thing I thought of, Alexis, was my parents' divorce was really bad. I was really young. Like, I don't, you know what I mean? And then I realized, like, there's this huge pause. And I said, oh, you mean my divorce? And he said, yeah. And then my mom said, no joke, I turned to her, she says, well, and you were just a very fragile baby.
Wow. It's putting the blame on you. Yeah.
Right. They put it on me. It was my fault. And that is the rub. Just own it. Just own it. But my mom did kind of spill the beans. She shared a bunch of stuff. She offered that she had been petrified of this day my entire life. She fell in love with Bill the summer going into senior year. It was his 6th year because he had already graduated and was staying to get his PhD at Purdue. And in the fall, they got engaged and then met their respective parents. And this is where my Aunt Beth recalls meeting Bill at their Kokomo home for Thanksgiving. I now have a picture of my mom and Bill in his Cleveland Heights home where he grew up, which is a mere 15 minutes from where I grew up. It's nuts. Because Bill was more interested in his rats than going to parties with her, meaning he was in the lab, because he was biomedical pharmacology, she broke off the engagement in March. She also offered that he was controlling. She didn't like how he dressed. She wanted him to look like a frat boy, and she didn't like that he wanted her to do his laundry.
That's interesting tidbits to throw in there, right? What did you think of the information that she provided you?
At the time, I remember thinking, just remember, just be soft and kind, just gather. Right afterwards, I was so hurt, but it really, the whole meeting kind of shed light on the fact that she's really a child and that she's pretty sick. So Joe, Dad, quickly re-entered the scene. So they had been dating on and off, but, were off, and they were pinned not long after. At some point, my dad learned that he got into Harvard Business School. And my guess is that Anne knew this prior to breaking off the engagement with Bill. I could be wrong. According to Mom, Bill was devastated and madly in love with her, and she was embarrassed that she had reconnected with Dad so quickly after breaking off the engagement. And this is where the story gets interesting, because my mom recalled the exact dates that she had sex. So she had sex with June 1st with Joe Kelly on top of the Sigma Chi building, little TMI there. And then June 6th was invited to Colleen McCoy's wedding. Bill is there. Joe, for some reason, is not. I don't understand why, but whatever. I'm never going to know. Quote unquote, she had pity sex with him. A month or so later, she realized she's pregnant and has to pick one. So she picked Joe. And for that, I'm very grateful for what I know now. She didn't want me or my sister.
She told you.
I
She
also
told you
learned in
this,
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah.
that she didn't want to have you or your sister.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
This is real special too. Every time she looks at me, she's reminded of her shame.
So
I
sorry.
asked her when she knew. She wouldn't answer. It feels pretty clear with me that she knew when I was born. I just looked too much like him. For certain, she had to have known when my sister was born. So she and my dad are separated. He had an affair with my now stepmother. Not cool, but whatever. They're now living together. And to spite him, she asked him for a drink at a bar. And she told him that it was likely I wasn't his. Did he want to take a paternity test? And my dad said, no. Sarah is my daughter. I'm not taking a paternity test. But you have a hell of a lot of balls telling this to me now. My stepfather has known for about 25 years, but this isn't totally confirmed. She said she didn't want to tell him because then he wouldn't marry her. And they had this like lovey-dovey thing where he was like, oh no, I would have married you. And I was like, okay, well, I mean, it's crazy.
Did she apologize to you during that conversation?
No. So that afternoon, I got a call from my sister, and I have kept the voicemail. Hey, Sarah. Obviously, mom called. She's fine. I'm fine. I know you said you didn't want to talk on the phone, but I kind of disagree. And I thought this is precisely the type of thing you should talk on the phone about. Text me or email or call me if you want. She's fine. I'm fine.
But no, how are you?
I didn't respond. And then the next day she was like, are you there? And I was like, yeah, I'm here. She's like, well, I just wanted to see how you're doing. And I was like, that's not what your voicemail. But anyway, then the following day, this is an email that I get from my mom. And she'd also asked me for a therapist the day before, which in my codependent way, I was so like, yes. I was like, let me get names of therapists for you.
Right. Of course.
This is her email. There are no adequate words to describe the awe I had for your courage yesterday. ... You handled the whole meeting with amazing aplomb. Thank you for your hugs and handholding, which is exactly what I did. I sat between them on the sofa, taking care of both of them while they were melting down. I do not deserve you, and I detest myself. I definitely need therapy and would appreciate the name you have. I'm at the bottom. Gotta dig myself out. I love you, Tatsi. So I actually pulled this email up because I wanted to show up here with rigorous, because I thought maybe throughout all this time, she's never apologized, talked to my kids. She's never called the kids. She's called my nephews, but never John and Annie, taken them out to dinner. They keep waiting for these apologies. They are starved for this apology. Never. So I thought maybe she did apologize in one of the emails or communications, and I just couldn't hear it. I didn't want to hear it because I was so pissed. So it was really interesting for me yesterday when I pulled this up, and I was like, yeah, no, I remembered it correctly.
Yeah.
That's probably one of the hardest things. So fast forward, go to John's graduation, and they were there, and we had dinner the night before. The kid's dad and his wife and their stepdaughter, they were late getting in. Their flight was delayed. So they showed up to dinner a little late. And my mom stands up and says in front of everyone, oh my God, Matt, I'm so sorry about all of this. I'm so sorry. And then Matt said, and it was one of the reasons I was like, yeah, now I remember why we got married. Like I loved it. He said, it's okay. Sounds like Sarah's got a handle on it, but we're here for John. So why don't we sit down and celebrate John?
So just to like restate this, she apologized to your ex-husband, but not you or your children. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Fast forward, that was the last time that I saw them, was at his graduation. I sent my mom an email and I just said, as long as you continue to drink, I can't have a relationship with you. I hope that you seek help. I'd be happy to do this. But I found out months after she sent an email to 3 of my first cousins. Meanwhile, just after this all happened, she's diagnosed with breast cancer, stage 1, horrible, but the best circumstances if you're going to be diagnosed with breast cancer. And she sent them an email saying, I want to let you know that I have breast cancer. Everything's okay, because there is a history of breast cancer in the family. And I don't know if you've heard, you may or may not know, but this is the situation with Sarah. Yes, it's true. I had an affair. I have not seen this email. No one will send it to me. I've only heard of what it is from my first cousin's now ex-wife. We just don't talk about things ever. I had an affair. Sarah was born out of love. He was very much in love with me. Unfortunately, Sarah and I are not in contact now because she says I'm an alcoholic and she doesn't talk to alcoholics. What's ironic about that is that I am part of and I show up to meetings several times a week and say, "Hi, my name is Sarah. I'm an alcoholic."
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but whatever. It's all about her. She had to rewrite the script, and none of my cousins have reached out to me except for Matt and Chris, which is really devastating to me, honestly. Like they all want to believe her. I don't know. It's crazy. It's crazy. I think the hardest thing for me with my family is that taking the DNA test was the offense, not the offense itself.
Yeah. That's such a good way of putting it. And I think that's something that unfortunately a lot of people in our community have experienced, where you are punished for uncovering a truth that always existed.
Yeah.
Is that kind of where things have left off with your mom? Have you spoken to her since?
No. We communicated. She was sending me emails for a little bit. She sends most emails after she's been drinking and say, like, know that you are loved, ... Like, that's not really going to do it. And then other random things like sending me Marilyn Monroe is selling her home. I thought you'd be interested. Like I did a report on Marilyn Monroe when I was like in 5th grade. It's so hurtful. And then similar with my sister tries to rope me in like with stuff around events and holidays. And I'm just like, no, thank you. I mean, she can't talk about it.
So you're basically no contact with your raised family at this point?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Have you been able to make contact with anyone on your biological father's side, aside from the cousin that you connected with? Has anybody reached out?
Yes, I'm in contact with my half brother. He's the oldest, and we just talked a couple days ago. We first connected and I told him, and then he called his dad and was like, "Is this true?" And his dad called him right back and was like, "Yes, it's true." It's the first time they had talked in 8 years since my grandfather's funeral. And he's a super cool guy. He's had his own trauma in life. He doesn't have hardly any communication with Bill. I've learned that Bill's a hard man. He's very serious and driven, and he's compartmentalized, and I don't fit in for him. And I'm working on, it's not about me, it's about him, right? It's still hard. Especially because I think of my kids, John and Annie. Like John's in aerospace and engineering, which is where Bill started off at Purdue. I mean, there's things about my kids now that make total sense that didn't before, especially my son. He can be he's an engineer and he's incredibly bright and exacting and driven and demanding. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I can also see that on myself sometimes, Yeah. And my uncle Dave, we're in contact. He's great. He's super excited. I haven't met them yet. I hope to soon. I was really excited at first, and then I had to kind of take a break because it was a little overwhelming. But now we're back to talking again. It's hard to know that I grew up so close to my grandparents growing up and that my mom knew that. That's really, really hard. I guess I very much look like my paternal grandmother, Nita. Like, exactly. And people say she really would have wanted a girl, like if she had known. But I get to learn about them through my Uncle Dave and Mike, and it's got to be enough for me right now,
Yeah.
I've finally accepted that radical acceptance around, for the longest time, I was going to write Bill a letter and regroup and say, are you sure? I want to know the truth, because it's come out that maybe I don't know the full truth around my conception. And I've just really recently come to realize I'm good with it. I'm okay. I belong to myself now, right? And I belong to me. We all deserve to have whatever we kind of what we want, but that's not my reality. And I honor that. I have three fathers, and I am incredibly grateful to each of them. You know, he gave me life.
Mm. I love what you said. I belong to me. That's really powerful. Oh, I'm gonna cry. Because I think for so many in the community, we don't feel like we belong, or there's something that never really fits. And to be able to just claim you for you is amazing.
Yes. And my kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's everything, right? Like I get to see it through them. They're really excited about learning more about their Italian heritage.
I know that it's an ongoing journey, this acceptance, the radical acceptance, the radical honesty, all of it. What has helped you get to this point?
Well, my sobriety for sure is a huge piece of it. And that community therapy, really good therapy. Something else that I've also been working with it's an MPE trauma coach who's been wonderful. And he recently turned me on to family constellations. And that, Alexis, is probably been the most powerful for me, in addition to movement.
Can you share a little bit about what a family constellation, what that is?
Yeah. So family constellations is a way to connect with the family soul. And it kind of reveals the entanglements that are causing us so much suffering. Family constellations is part of systemic constellations, which is it's about the alignments and arrangements and our larger family and communal stories. And so what happens in a family is, for instance, if someone's excluded for whatever reason, we don't know. When that isn't dealt with, that energy is in the system, it's in the field, and it will find a place down in the system in new family members until it's resolved. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really a really loving way to kind of untangle our entanglements, right? It's a really cool healing modality. And I think it's especially powerful for this type of trauma, right? Because there's so much I'm not going to learn. I've come up with the mantra now that I have three fathers from the work that I've done, which feels really, really good. And that they've agreed that they're no longer going to fight over me or not acknowledge me. I'm no longer a question mark. The biggest thing that's come up for me is that I'm no longer a question, right? I'm just learning a ton about myself and a ton about my mom, which allows me to have some compassion for her, which feels really good. I'd much rather have compassion for her than, make her wrong. And I think that's one of the biggest things is it's not about right or wrong. It's just about telling the truth.
Yeah.
There's no right or wrong. That's family constellations. Even though you might find somebody that was persecuted or a persecutor, it's not about like calling them out. It's about acknowledging them and having them find their right place in the system so that the rest of the system can move on.
That's really powerful.
It's been really powerful for me. And even like my sponsor was just saying, she's like, you've really shifted a lot, like from, I don't know, I think you can become a victim in this, right? And now I'm coming from, I'm human. My parents are human. It's also not about forgiveness for me. And just because I say like, I'm human, my mother, and I have compassion for her, I have so much compassion for her when she didn't know she was pregnant. She didn't know who the father was. Like, holy cow, that must have been unbelievably, just unbearable almost, right? So much compassion for her and so much compassion for my mom who suffered from whatever trauma she inherited from her grandmother and that my great-grandmother and my great-great-grandmother. And the healthiest thing for me now is to not be in relationship with her and to love her from afar. I do love her. She's my mom. But I'm no longer in the role that I was cast.
That's really powerful and good for you. Congratulations, for breaking that.
Thank you. Yeah.
And I know how
Yeah.
important that is for you with your children too, to break that pattern. So,
oh, that's everything, right?
Yeah.
And like we talked about on the retreat, it's not just break, it's changing the cycle. That's where the real power lies. I mean, breaking it is great, but it's like, what are you going to do so that it doesn't repeat itself? I mean, yes, you can break it, but yeah, it's the change that feels really good.
What advice do you have for a parent who's keeping a DNA surprise from their child?
Tell them the truth and tell it early. Both parent and child deserve the truth. I know how much different my life would have been, but I also think the life that my mother could have had she not been burdened with this for so long.
What advice do you have for someone who just uncovered a DNA surprise?
Love on yourself. There's no right or wrong, and whatever you're feeling is your feeling, and it's 100% valid. Try to give yourself some space and time. Try to grieve as much as you can. Surround yourself with people that love you. And you might be surprised by people that you thought loved you, don't. But then there's also those people that you just reach out to and they'll become your person just like that. So know that you're not alone and you belong.
Sarah, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. People that are listening, Sarah and I met at the retreat, and I was so happy when you reached out to share your story after attending, because it's such a powerful story, and also because you have done so much work in such a short time to heal and move through this very difficult experience. So I really admire you and respect the way that you've handled this. And I wish you the best moving forward.
Oh, thank you, Alex. I appreciate that. And I so appreciate you. Thank you for the opportunity to share my story. And I just feel so held and cared for by you and sharing the story. And it's a real gift. And I really admire you for that. So thank you.
Thanks again to Sarah for sharing her story. If you have a DNA surprise that you'd like to share, please submit your story at dnasurprises.com. And remember, you can join me over on Patreon for ad-free early access to episodes at patreon.com/DNA Surprises. Until next time. This episode of DNA Surprises was hosted, produced, and edited by me, Alexis Auerselt. It was mixed and mastered by Josh Auerselt of Siren Recording Studios.